Hi everyone, I'm Susannah Dornan, representing International Baptist College and Seminary in still bright and sunny Chandler, Arizona. And I'm so excited to be able to share with you about an area that I think impacts all of us as teachers and is a challenge we all face in the classroom. Have you seen this look before? Or maybe this one? Or maybe this one? Looking at this list below of characteristics, only interested in observing, delays in completing tasks, content with average work, avoids challenges, finds tasks boring or irrelevant, unsure of expectations, disinterested by goals and challenges. Are you picturing a particular student or group of students in your class? Students become disengaged in learning for a variety of reasons, and determining the cause can be paramount in helping the student become engaged. While working to identify whether there's an underlying root, whether it's a home situation, a character issue, or an academic issue, one of the keys to helping our disengaged learners is to take control of what we as teachers have 100% control over, and that is selecting our teaching methods. If we want students to be engaged, then we have to be sure that we're using instructional variety in our classes, not doing the same thing, the same way every day for every lesson. It's so easy to become stuck in lecture, textbook reading, workbooks, and worksheets, which, don't get me wrong, all have their place in the classroom. But when those are the only methods that we use, it's no wonder that students become quickly disengaged. So today we're going to look at adding active learning strategies to enhance our direct instruction, to enhance the many lessons or the lectures that we're using in order to facilitate students thinking and interacting with the content. As we get started, there are a couple questions I'd like to ask you just to get your mind thinking about this topic. How much time are your students actively engaged and actively responding in the classroom? Also, what does active engagement actually look like? And then third, what are some methods teachers can use to actively engage more students? Ryan and Martins have said that students learn both passively and actively. Passive learning takes place when students take on the role of receptacles of knowledge. That is, they do not directly participate in the learning process. Active learning, they say, is more likely to take place when students are doing something besides listening. We need to remember as teachers that learning is not a spectator sport. It's meant to be participatory. When we're talking about student engagement, it's important to distinguish the difference between active and passive engagement or active and passive responding. Active responding occurs when a student responds orally to a question or writes out the answer themselves or calculates the answer or physically makes a response to a question that a teacher poses. Whereas passive responding involves a student listening to the teacher give an answer, or they read about a correct answer, or they listen to a classmate recite the right answer. It's no surprise that there are positive relationships between learner achievement and actively responding in the classroom. But research tells us that nearly half of a typical learner's day may be involved in passive responding. It could actually be more than that. If you think of maybe a quieter student in your class or one who is disengaged already, they may be spending less than half of their day actually actively involved, actively engaged in what's going on in the classroom. So our goal should be to plan lessons so that learners can spend 75% of time engaged in active responding. That can be a challenge, right? So let's talk about why that's such a challenge for us as teachers. If you're watching this with other teachers, I'd encourage you to pause the video now and discuss this question. What are some barriers or obstacles to active learning and active responding in your class? Why do students spend so much of their day passively absorbing content? Were you able to talk through or discuss a few of these barriers? A few that I came up with when thinking about active learning and why it doesn't always happen even in my own classes. This was the list that I came up with. Time, the additional prep time that's needed for active learning activities. Large class sizes make it difficult to involve many students, reluctant or non-existent participation from students. I found this especially with my high school English students who didn't matter what I tried to do to involve them, they were very resistant to that. Or a lack of materials, equipment, or resources. Maybe you know of really neat ideas that could involve the students, but you don't have what you need in order to implement those in the classroom. So we need to think through, how do we overcome these barriers? There are many that might prevent us from incorporating some of these strategies in the classroom. Well, I think it's important for us to consider the benefits of active learning and look to Christ. One help is recognizing the benefits of this type of learning and remembering how Christ, the master teacher, taught himself, especially with his disciples. You see, Christ is far more concerned for more than the disciples' head knowledge. He desired transformation, and one method that he used in his teaching was through actively involving them in the ministry that he was doing. Have you ever considered why Christ had his disciples hand out food in the narrative of the feeding of the 5,000, or even the servants when he turned the water into wine? There were times when Christ merely told or demonstrated truth or his power, but other times he actively involved his disciples in his ministry. Why was this? Well, I think it's because active involvement is effective. The benefits of using such activities are many, and you can see the list here, including improved critical thinking skills, increased retention and transfer of new information, more motivation, improved interpersonal skills, and ultimately, more success. When we talk about active engagement and student engagement in the classroom, this should involve students participating in a didactic triangle interaction between the teacher, student, and content. I can think back to many a lesson, especially when teaching at the high school level, where the primary interaction was between me and the content, which is less than effective. As Christian educators, our goals should go beyond head knowledge and our students succeeding academically. We're about to talk about some tips and tricks to engage more students in learning, but remember, these methods and materials are not the end. They are a means to engage students in lessons that will help them learn to think and develop values and character. Let's not forget that those are the end, not necessarily the strategies that we're going to talk about. Borich has said that students who are involved in, acting on, and otherwise thinking about the material being presented have the greatest opportunity to learn. And the evidence suggests that if an instructor's goals are not only to impart information, but also to develop cognitive skills and to change attitudes, which is our goal in a Christian school and in a Christian school classroom, then alternative teaching strategies should be interwoven with the lecture method during classroom presentations. Now we are going to talk about methods and materials that we can use in the class to actively engage students and to get more participation out of our students. In order to have active involvement, teachers have to make sure that all students have regular opportunities to actively respond to questions, instead of passively responding by hearing other students give an answer. Whiteboards are one of the easiest materials to use to accomplish that purpose, because multiple students can be working on the same question. Teachers can see all the answers at one time. If you don't have whiteboards, laminated cardstock works really well, or even sheet protectors with a piece of paper put inside work just as well as whiteboards. So think outside the box if you don't have access to whiteboards for your students. Now remember though, we need to aim for instructional variety in the classroom. That's very important. So even though whiteboards are a great tool to use, overuse of them can decrease some of what I'm going to call the engagement factor. So now we're going to look at some technology materials that have a high engagement factor and are useful for getting multiple students to respond. A student response system refers to an instant method of gathering student feedback in the classroom. iClickers are one of the more common systems that are used, where students have a remote and can respond to questions in a lecture, and then their responses are recorded on the screen and displayed on the screen for everyone to be able to see, whether that's a TV, an interactive whiteboard, even a wall just a blank wall you can project onto as well. These systems can be pricey. So one free website that I found that accomplishes a very similar purpose is called Poll Everywhere. And it's a website that allows you to create online polls that you can embed directly into your PowerPoint. So this is a PowerPoint I embedded into, this is a poll that I embedded into my PowerPoint. And if I were to display this to you, and if the poll was live, you could text Susannah Dornan 940 to that certain number, and that would allow you to join the poll. Then after you give the answer to their question, your answer would be able to display on the screen. So students can see answers from their classmates, the teacher can respond to those quickly. It's a great way to actively involve students. So I'm going to show you a video of my students responding to a poll that I created for an English class. So this is what the website looked like. I created this poll, and now you'll be able to, if I move my floating head out of the way, you can see the answers coming in. The hardest part of writing a research paper, finding reliable sources, one student said. Another student said the topic is hard to come up with. Let's see if we can keep the video playing. The hardest part for me is probably taking the time to actually do it. You're seeing a trend here. The limited amount of time and the stress of all the other papers from other classes because I have other papers. I'm not very good at writing, but I'm up for the challenge. Citing and finding enough to write about. I have to think of a topic, finding good sources. I think there's plenty of info on the topic, but I go to the library and I get stuck. You can see that having a poll like this in class gets students to honestly respond. They may not have even volunteered an answer to the question in the first place, but they were required to text in their answer, and so I was able to get some good feedback on how to shape the unit on the research paper based on their answers to just an easy poll question. So you can get great feedback as a teacher, but you also are engaging students in the lesson too. These polls are very easy to create, easy to use in the classroom if you have access to a computer and some sort of presentation tool like PowerPoint in the screen. You can embed these polls into your lessons and really get students involved and find helpful information for you as the teacher. So another idea for as an alternative to a student response system is to use something called a plicker. And a plicker is a paper clicker. See this here? This is a paper clicker or plicker. And it's an image similar to a QR code on a piece of paper that can be scanned by a tablet or smartphone. Teachers ask students questions that they have entered on the Plicker's website or on an app, and students give their answer with their paper clicker. Depending on which way a student holds the Plicker image, this can be rotated, determines the response to the question. Teachers can then scan the class answers using a phone or a tablet, and then the app can record and display student responses. Plickers are free. Teachers just have to create the questions online and print Plicker cards for their students. So now I'm going to show you a short video of a teacher actually using Plickers in the classroom and talking about why she loves them.
Implementing Plickers in my first grade classroom has been super easy. It's as simple as you go on the website, plickers.com, and you sign up your class. In my class, each Plickers card that they're going to get has a number on it, and you assign their name to the card. You sign their name to the card. So for example, this is card number 1, so that's the student in my class who is the number 1. And then you print all these off. I printed them off on cardstock just because they're a little thicker and easier for the students to hold. So each card has A, B, C, or D, and depending on how they hold the card, that's how they put in their answer. So if you wanted to answer A, you would hold it this way, B, you would hold it this way, and so on. So there's a lot of going through it with the students to make sure that they know how to submit an answer, and you'd be surprised on how quickly they pick it up. So the way that I like to do it is I take my phone and I use that as my scanner, and then all the answers come into the iPad here. So for example, I did which shape has 4 sides, and most of the students answered C, which was square, and a couple answered hexagon, so I know that with those 2 students, I know that I need to go over that with them. So I know that they're engaged because they all want to know, did you get me? Did you get my card? And they just love using it, and they love watching the graph on the board that shows what students have answered, whatever they answered. Another thing I really like about Plickers is the accountability it has on the students. I know when I'm scanning in their cards who has answered. So if I have 2 kids that haven't submitted and answered, I can say, okay, you need to get your answer in. What I do with the information that I get, a lot of times we start off with just a lot of fun questions, but now I'm starting to use it for kind of assessment purposes. So like this week we learned about 2D and 3D shapes. So I was asking them questions about 2D and 3D shapes, and I can see right away who is not getting it and who is getting it. So I'll use that information next week to figure out who I need to work with. Also, a bunch of the other first grade teachers are doing it too, who are interested in using technology in the classroom. So it's been a great way for us to bounce ideas off each other and compare results, and it's been wonderful.
If you're interested in finding out more information about using Plickers in the classroom, how to get started, how to set that up, this QR code can be scanned, and that will link you directly to a YouTube video that gives some helpful ideas on how to implement Plickers in the classroom. The next tech idea is to use games as an alternative to worksheets or just asking questions in a review form in the classroom. Kahoot is a game-based learning platform used as educational technology in schools and other educational institutions. Learning games called Kahoots are user-generated multiple-choice quizzes that can be accessed via a web browser or through the Kahoot app. Games can be played in person as a class, or teachers can assign students an assignment of playing a Kahoot, and they can play it by themselves at home even. It's a great form of review, or it could even be a fun assessment tool for those who are teaching in a virtual format. So now I'm going to show you a little bit about what a Kahoot game might look like. Students join the Kahoot game with their phones and respond to questions. I'll show you what that looks like.
If it weren't for him, there'd be no apples on this limb. He's been good to me.
Another game that can be played in the classroom to review information or assess students' knowledge is called Factal. And Factal is a game-based platform that allows you to create a Jeopardy-style game that can be played as a class. A paid version actually allows students to text in answers, but if you have junior high students or elementary students that don't have phones, this is a great alternative to a Kahoot game. Teams select a question, give their answer, and then the teacher can give points to the team that gave the correct answer, or even negative points. So at this time, feel free to pause the video again to answer these questions. Have you used any of these tech resources before? Or if you've used other types of technology in the classroom to actively involve students, this is a good opportunity to share with your colleagues resources that you found helpful in the classroom. We need to remember that as Eric Scheninger has said, pedagogy trumps technology, always. William Horton states, unless you get the instructional design right, technology can only increase the speed and certainty of failure. Remember, it's not using tech for tech's sake. If the technology solves a problem or creates interest in a way that a non-tech tool cannot, feel free to use it, please do. But it should not serve as a substitute for quality instructional design. Maybe you say, I don't have the capacity or the materials or the resources in order to do some of those tech ideas. That's okay. Now we're going to look at some strategies that you can use in your class without any form of technology. These are no tech resources to enhance your direct instruction. These first two ideas involve getting students to talk with each other about the lesson. I'd encourage you to try a think, pair, share activity to encourage all students to interact with the material you're presenting to them. In this activity, an instructor states an open-ended question, then asks the students to spend a minute or two thinking about and possibly writing down what they think the answer to that question is, and then having them pair up, either themselves or with you assigning pairs, and discussing their answers to the question for 2 or 3 minutes. Then when that time period is up, the class can reconvene and you can get their input and find out what the pairs discussed together. Similar to that is another idea called stump your partner. Very similarly, teachers present material to the students and then pause and ask students to pair up and come up with a question that they think will stump their partner. This does several things. It gets them it ensures that they're actually paying attention to what you're teaching them, but it also requires them to use higher order thinking skills to be able to come up with a deep question that will stump their partner. Next, we have one of my favorite resources to use as a teacher. They're very cheap, but they're extremely helpful in getting responses from students in a quick way. Those are sticky notes. You can use sticky notes as students are reading. They can annotate a textbook that you don't want them to write in on a sticky note and then stick that in their book. You can use sticky notes for students as they're reading to make text-to-text connections or text-to-cell connections, text-to-world connections. All of those types of connections are so important for students to make as they're reading. They can record those on sticky notes, they can illustrate, they can take notes for your classes as you're teaching on sticky notes. They are also useful as an exit ticket. Halfway through the lesson or at the end of the lesson, a teacher can ask students to write down what stuck with them. I love the idea of using sticky notes as an exit ticket. You can also use sticky notes on another method called the muddiest point. With the muddiest point, teachers ask students to write down on a sticky note or another sheet of paper what doesn't make sense, what they're struggling with, what is most muddy to them about the lesson. This method is useful because students are again involved, they're thinking about the material, but the teacher also can find out what they don't understand, what students are not understanding, so that the next lesson the teacher can clarify, explain, elaborate, and fix those issues that students are having with a particular lesson. Another method is to use something called a participation card. And I'm going to show you in just a moment a video of a teacher implementing participation cards in your class. And you may watch the video and think, I don't think I would want to do that with my students. And that's okay, but I want you to be thinking about, could you adapt this idea of having cards or prompts for students that allow them to interact with each other or interact with you and with you as the teacher a little bit more? That's what I want you thinking about as you watch this video now.
So at this point, we're going to share our responses. Remember to use your participation cards.
So participation cards are a set of index cards which have labels on them. I agree, I disagree, or I don't know how to respond. We use them to assess students' understanding, but we also use them to give students voice. So I first pose a question.
What was the summary of this excerpt?
The summary of these 2 pages is that Mrs. Wise is setting Jasmine up to fail.
Scholars will listen to the responses and then they will use their participation cards.
I respectfully disagree with you. What can the reader infer about Ms. Wise based on paragraph 2?
We obviously cannot have 24 scholars speaking at the same time, but we want everyone to feel their ideas matter. Even if I am very shy and I don't feel comfortable, my voice was still heard.
Overall, I want you to remember that it's not the strategies themselves that are going to make the difference. It's the teacher being enthusiastic, engaging, and implementing active learning and a variety of instructional techniques into the classroom that's going to make a biggest difference on the students. So now as we close, after you end the video, I'd like for you all to discuss a couple questions together. What did you get from this session? Can you see yourself implementing any of these methods or materials? And in what context could you see Plickers working? Or when would be a good opportunity, do you think, to use Think, Pair, Share? Would that work in your classroom? I want you to talk about that with your fellow teachers. I'd also like for you to talk about any other active learning strategies that you are already using in the classroom. Your teacher next door may not know that you're using a certain strategy that works really well, so this is a good opportunity for you guys to share and have iron sharpening iron, helping each other to improve in your teaching. And then the last question, are there any strategies that you would like to research further? Think about maybe implementing one of these into your classroom. Don't walk away from this forgetting about these strategies. Maybe none of these will work for you. That's okay. See if you can find a different one that you can get your students more actively involved in the classroom with. Thank you for listening today. Can I leave you with one final challenge from 1 Corinthians 15? Verse 58 says, "Therefore, my beloved brethren," or in this case, my fellow teachers, "let's be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as we know that our labor is not in vain in the Lord." Ultimately, as Christian teachers, let's not forget that this is kingdom work that we're after. It's not just about using cool strategies just for being the fun teacher, right? Ultimately, we're hoping and teaching for transformation. So let's be active and passionate about seeing our students learn and succeed in all areas of their development.